Hello, everybody. Today I wanted to give a bit of an addition. Today I wanted to create an addition to the introduction, and I do believe that this will be of great use to you. Even though there's nothing technical in this tutorial, uh, there is a bit of a motivation embedded into it. Basically, here I wanted to deal with the subject: why should anybody learn how to use Linux, or why should anybody learn how to use Red Hat or get their certification or anything of a kind? Well, here's why. You might have this idea that most of the world runs either on Windows or on Mac, but that is simply not the case. If you just take a look at Google, at Facebook, at Twitter, at eBay, at PayPal, all these servers, all these companies, they pretty much completely run on Linux. I'm not sure about eBay, but like 99% sure that it runs on Linux as well. All of these companies, they are the biggest companies, one of the biggest companies on the planet, and they all run on Linux. All of their machines are Linux, all of their servers are running Linux. And if you want to get a job with any of those companies as as a technical person or anything of a kind, you will need to know uh, a great deal about Linux, because pretty much the entire Google development team, the entire not the team, the entire Google development platform is actually on a Linux machines, all of it. Even though the employees can bring their own computers into the company that can have any operating system installed on them, the main OS which they use as a platform for development is actually Linux. They use a version of Ubuntu that they've adapted to their own needs. Anyway, uh, as I said, if you take a look at Facebook as well, all of their servers from beginning till this day on today, they run on Linux. But okay, that might still not be enough for you. You might still think, oh well, there is bound to be something else. There's bound to be something more other than those few companies. Well, let me tell you something. All of your Android phones that you have, that you carry in your pockets, or that you see on television or whatever, they all run on Linux as well. Your smart TVs run on Linux. I don't know what else do you need, basically. Even though the desktop computers, till this day on today, most of the desktop computers do run on Windows, and the market share is pretty low there for Linux. That is nothing. Just imagine all the Android phones they run on Linux, all the major companies run on Linux, pretty much I mean, not all, but certainly a very large portion of servers, like 90% of them in the world, run on Linux based systems. Your routers, pretty much all routers, they run on Linux as well, be it your home router or your Cisco router, or they don't necessarily need to run directly on Linux, but they run on a derivative of a Linux. Cisco routers, Juniper routers, the commands on the Juniper router are pretty much the same as within a Linux terminal. The environment is very similar. That's fantastic for me and for a lot of people out there. And even the desktop is slowly being taken over by Linux, more so in the recent years than in the past. Why so? Well, first of all, it's completely free. Most of it anyway. If you want to, in certain cases, only if you want support, you pay. Only if you want like professional support or something of a kind, then you pay for that support. You subscribe or something of a kind. But the operating system in and of itself is free. You just go onto the net, download it, and run it. That's one of the reasons. The second reason is, although this might not be the case to the greatest of extents with Windows 8.1, uh, Windows is, well, not Windows, but sorry, Linux is generally far more secure than any Windows or Mac based operating system. Why? Well, one of the main reasons, I suppose, is the fact that it's less used for desktop, so therefore there is less interest to develop viruses and something of a kind. However, that is not the only case for it. I mean, okay, yeah, true. there are pretty much no viruses out there for Linux-based operating system. There are a few antivirus systems for it, but they're generally not used primarily because the system itself is very secure. So even if you were to download a virus as a regular user from the net or something of a kind to install anything, you require root privileges. So even though it's sitting there on your computer, it won't be able to do anything. Security is a major part of Linux. You won't have any problems with viruses. Your system will be very secure, provided, of course, that you at least configure it properly to a good extent. However, desktop users, people who just browse, who use a browser mainly, nothing else pretty much, actually Linux would be perfect for them, but they tend to use Windows primarily because they are used to it. In Linux, you never have to see the terminal if you do not want to. I use the terminal. People in the business use the terminals always. Even desktop users use the terminals primarily because you can get things done a lot faster, and the true power rests there in the blessed terminal. However, if you don't want to, as a desktop user, you will never have to use it. It will not be a requirement. But I just wanted to make this very brief video just to show everybody and explain that most of the world out there is actually, most of the appliances, most of the devices out there in the world, network devices, computers, servers, etc., supercomputers are run on Linux. Pretty much all the supercomputers are run on Linux-based operating systems or on the Linux that we know and use in our daily lives today. Plus, as I've mentioned previously, Windows and Mac do cost money to buy, while you can do pretty much everything and more with Linux-based operating systems without paying a cent. I mean, completely free. Although you will encounter some problems inevitably with applications. For example, Adobe Suite, Adobe Photoshop, or something of a kind will generally not work on Linux. Even with compatibility layer wine, you're going to have problems and it's not going to work there. So in the application section for desktop, it's still lacking a little bit. Also in sense of for gamers, okay, so Linux is definitely not for gamers. Uh, I mean, if you're an average gamer who doesn't actually require super performance, like to set everything to max out settings on graphics and stuff like that, you'll be able to run most of the games without any problems on medium settings or something like that. With a compatibility layer, you won't need to download anything specific for Linux. You can just download a Windows game and run it on Linux with Wine without bigger problems. Most of the things will run. Sometimes you will encounter some problems, but most of the time it will run. So those are the two problems that Linux encounters. But I just wanted to show this picture to you, as I have already stated, that most of the world, most of the businesses, most of the places where you can get a job, where you can work, they actually run on Linux-based operating systems. Banks especially. Maybe not the bank's computers like the one that you see when you walk to the reception, but the infrastructure of the bank, their servers, and the stock market especially. So the stock market in New York, the pretty much all of the servers there are on a Linux system. And that is what I want to show you, that most of the world runs on Linux, that is where you can find jobs. I'm not saying that you cannot find jobs with Microsoft or with Windows or something of a kind, but you are far more likely to find something with Linux, even though it's a free operating system, because companies do use it. They do need people to actually operate it and to do stuff with it. If you possess the knowledge, you definitely have a better opportunity, a better chance out there to be employed, to find work, and to make an income. Aside from that, Linux is highly customizable. There is pretty much nothing that you cannot do, primarily because it's open source, and you get a variety of desktop versions for it. So let's say you want to download Fedora, which is an open source Red Hat free distribution for desktop users. Basically, you can get like a GNOME desktop, or you can get LXD desktop, or you can get a KDE desktop. We will get into all of this once we get to the GUI part and all of that. But what I wanted to say is that when you're using Windows or Mac, you're pretty much stuck with one desktop without extensive customization. While on the other hand, with Linux, you can just download the spin that you want. So if you want a KDE spin of Fedora, you just download that one. If you want GNOME spin of Fedora, you just download that one. And you get a completely different desktop. Uh, they differ to a very, very large extent. The user interfaces are completely different, but the terminals are always the same. The terminal commands are always the same. That is why when you're doing something via the terminal, it is a universal way of doing things. It does not vary from one distribution to another to a significant extent. It's pretty much the same everywhere. In any case, if you still have some doubts, feel free to post them in the discussion section. But there is one more thing that I wanted to address in this tutorial, and that is the format for your questions in the discussion section. Now, it would be good if you encounter any errors or any problems during this course while you follow it, and you're bound to encounter some problems. That's normal. It happens to everybody. You're unable to do something. You've installed it on one system. The drivers are not. You don't have the drivers for that. Some problems. Doesn't matter what it is. If you're posting it in the discussion, just say from which lecture it is. Copy the error message. Post it there, and then explain your problem. Also, explain what you have tried to do and the procedure that you have used in order to actually attempt to do that. I do not say this to make my job easier. I just say this to, even though I check the discussions on Udemy on daily basis, and I try to answer everybody as fast as I possibly can. Usually within 12 hours, usually everybody gets a response within 12 hours or less. Uh, but when I don't have all the information, I basically have to write an answer. Could you please provide an error message or something like that? And then that adds a lot more time, and you need to read it, and then you need to find the error message again, and then you need to post it, and then you need to wait for me to check it out again. Basically, you can save yourselves a lot of time by just posting the error message, by listing the procedure that you have done, and perhaps explaining the setup, but most importantly of all, specifying which lecture were you following, and where did you encounter the problems. So if you just post those things, I will be able to help you a lot better in a far shorter time frame, so to say. Anyway, also in the discussions, do not feel free to ask me about anything related to Linux. There is nothing that is outside of the scope. You can ask pretty much anything. I will be more than happy to pretty much provide any information that I can on pretty much any subject that is related to Linux, either directly or indirectly. In any case, that would be all for now. In the next tutorial, we will get into the stuff. We will actually start doing things. We will get technical and approach without fear. Don't let that stop you or deter you or something of a kind. If you encounter difficulties in the beginning, it's okay. We've all encountered them. It was difficult for pretty much everybody. If you just stick with it for a little while, you will see it gets a lot easier after a certain period of time. I remember when I started using it for the first 6 months up to a year, I was completely lost, like errors at every corner. But after half a year or something like that of using Linux, of playing around with it on my own without any courses, I pretty much I started feeling comfortable with it, no problems. You will do this in a far shorter amount of time because I will introduce you to it step by step, and you will see you will become very comfortable with Linux after you have finished this course. Anyway, I'll see you in the next tutorial.